We've covered presidential elections before.
Well, not me.
And we hated it.
Hated the pundits.
Hated the horse race.
And hated the silly questions.
So we knew what we had to do.
We couldn't care about a White House press pass.
And we couldn't travel fancy.
And we had to be independent.
It had to be about getting one shot to ask one question.
But then those questions started fitting together.
I'm Michelle Mitchell.
I'm Mark Huntley.
I'm Ed Head.
And this is Common Sense.
We went to Afghanistan in 2005, 2006.
There was never a history of suicide bombings in Afghanistan, as far as I know.
This is the mosque. Do not engage the mosque.
Roger.
And we arrived just before the first suicide bomb went off. And by the time we left, there was one going off every day. And at the time, officials, U.S. officials, Afghan officials, all told us, hey, victory, things are going great. Democracy's on the march.
When Iraq was going nuts, everybody was saying, well, that's crazy, but we're doing well in Afghanistan.
Yeah, well, here's the frustrating point. It's like, okay, now in 2008, Afghanistan is more deadly for American troops than Iraq, but quite frankly, Mark, it was more deadly for American troops than Iraq 2 years ago as well, and nobody was talking about it. Every report we've had from people coming back now say that Kabul in particular is completely different. The places that we had dinner at don't even exist. They've either been bombed or they've been closed because the owners are worried they'll be bombed.
It's interesting that Obama is actually advocating...
Yes, I think we need more troops. I've been saying that for over a year now.
Yeah, well, Obama says more troops on the ground. McCain says...
It's not just the addition of troops that matters. It's a strategy that will succeed.
But they're both very vague on what that exactly means. I mean, I don't know.
We've got a lot of work to do in Afghanistan, and it's going to be tough.
If the United States has al-Qaeda in our sights, then we should take them out.
Yeah, direct hits right there.
Headshot.
Is the solution to the war that we all thought we won more troops?
Or do we let the Afghans try to solve it?
Pun intended. A grand moment. Political pontification and prognostication requires juices from the gods, I say. When it comes to major strategy, it's called the 2MRC approach, two major regional conflicts. Okay, now it's manageable. We were going to do what they called a win, hold, win strategy. But that's always been viewed as a very tenuous prospect because on theory, it would work, but in reality, no one really knows how it would work. But the infrastructure of the United States, the force structure of the United States, even at the peak of the Reagan buildup, was a force structure that the United States had great apprehension could, in fact, fight a two-front war. We have yet to this day to hear what is the objective in Afghanistan, in Iraq. We're going to achieve victory. Has anyone actually identified what victory is? Think about that.
So I would send 2 to 3 additional brigades to Afghanistan.
One of the things that has not happened is the Afghan National Army has not been built up. Right now, I think they're up to 75,000 troops, and they're completely on training wheels. So they don't do a lot of missions on their own. They're starting to do a few more, but if you go out with American troops, there's usually a small company or even a platoon attached to them of Afghan troops, and they don't have enough ammunition, they don't have enough food, they don't have, half the time they don't have enough clothes for the winter time. They are amazing at getting intelligence and moving through the mountains in ways that the Americans cannot. So they have the resources, but they're not trained enough to go after an enemy that is getting much more serious. The guys that I was with were up in northeastern Kunar. And the Taliban there, I wouldn't even call them Taliban. They are groupings of insurgents against the foreign troops and against Karzai's government. And they were doing ambushes that have not been seen before. We use the word Taliban, but it's It's just an umbrella for a lot of different groups who may not even have the same ideas of how to rule Afghanistan. They're not unified under Omar. They all have their own agendas, and they have come together just like the Mujahideen groups did in the 80s to fight, the foreigners.
I believe, which is normally I would say many Afghan will tell you this, that there are two elements in fighting against terrorism in this region. One is the Afghans, one is Al-Qaeda, Pakistanis, and their bases. We will strongly urge United States, Europe, and the whole world to put pressure on Pakistan to dismember or dissolve all the terrorist bases in Pakistan. When those are dissolved, the Afghan terrorists, they don't have a network, they don't have an organization, and they don't have even higher education for these kind of activities. Then we can easily defeat them in our land. They should talk to the Pakistani officers black and white. Remove these bases or we will remove it. If United States was able to attack Iraq, then I think there is a legitimate reason for attacking, Pakistan border areas to eliminate those terrorist networks.
If you hear barking in the background, I'm feeding my dog. The problem is we have so many strategies. Every nation has its own strategy for its own region, but there isn't a single strategy. The United States has got one, which is about polishing up Al-Qaeda. Britain has a strategy which is about making sure that we win on the ground in Helmand, the Kandahar. The Canadians have a strategy which is about Kandahar. The Germans have a strategy which is about, and so on. So there isn't a single overarching strategy. I know, I tried to put one together.
What is the goal in Afghanistan? So that is, so you'd go to NATO headquarters and you've got, a British general, an American general, a Dutch general, and they're all doing different things, backbiting each other. So I think that he's absolutely right. You have to settle on one rule, one standard for the rules of engagement, but more important, one command structure, and whether that's under Karzai or the future president of Afghanistan or one NATO commander. We didn't put many troops in there, right? And part of the problem is that the entire South was left to the warlords. It was left to the Afghans. And slowly but surely, the same fiefdoms that were there during the Civil War were built up again. So we did give it to the Afghans. We gave it to the wrong Afghans.
There's a real issue for NATO here, and there's a real issue for the European Union, which is very simple. NATO is now, its credibility is now at stake.
It's one thing to give it to the Afghans. It's another thing for them to be able to hold it. If we had built up that army from the beginning to 150,000 standing army that could actually fight and have weapons and resources and the kinds of the intelligence gathering that they can do, we probably wouldn't be in this situation.